Hello, everybody. Welcome to another installment of A Rebel Without Applause, coming to you from my little nutshell of infinite space right here in the Wood of the Holly under the sign. And today I have a very special and honored guest. He first came to my attention with a really terrific op-ed in the New York Times. I've come to later learn that he is the founder of Gideon's Substack. His political writings range across really a variety of platforms, including the New York Times op-ed page, Politico. He's founder of his own blog. His writings cover a host of subjects from political strategy to foreign and domestic policy to Shakespeare and movies. And he's also a filmmaker and producer himself. He's a big-time braniac, and he's here to break it down with me today. Welcome, Noah Millman. How are you?
I'm okay, thank you. I hope I can live up to that introduction.
Well, you've done the living before, so you don't have to worry about it. Thanks for joining me. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So, like I said, you came to my attention, and we'll start with this fraught political moment that we're in.
Yeah.
A really excellent op-ed piece that you wrote in the New York Times about the 14th Amendment and really how I think it's being ignored and overridden. And I just want you to just tell me why the 14th Amendment, why that op-ed, and your thinking behind it.
So the first piece that I wrote for the Times, for the opinion section as opposed to as a book review, the first piece I wrote for them was back in 2021. And that was a piece, the title was America Needs to Break Up Its Largest States. And it was part of a symposium that they had called Outside the Box, where they were looking for outside of the box ideas about how to reshape the country in fundamental ways. And I think I got pigeonholed a little bit by that as somebody who writes about sort of constitutional type of issues. So most of what I've written since then, in some level or other, touches on constitutional questions. The most recent piece, which I think is the one you're referring to, jumped off from the work of Bruce Ackerman, who's a constitutional historian, who has a theory. He is what one would call a popular constitutionalist, which is to say, if there's a spectrum of views on how the Constitution is to be understood, at one end are people who view the Supreme Court as the supreme interpreter of the Constitution, and the Constitution is a kind of holy text that requires a certain kind of priestly expertise to interpret correctly. Traditional Republicans tended to take this kind of attitude. So somebody like Antonin Scalia was, an originalist and a textualist, and that's very much the perspective to come from it. What you think is these words have a meaning that you need to be steeped in legal history to understand, and then you pronounce ex cathedra, this is what these words mean, and then that is what they mean. To the other end of popular constitutionalism, the view that basically we the people wrote the Constitution, and we the people are therefore the ones who ultimately get to decide what it means. Abraham Lincoln opposed the Taney decision in Dred Scott, and did not think that Taney had that he had the last word. He thought the people had the last word. And what Bruce Ackerman, who comes from that end of the spectrum, is a big-time liberal Democrat, argued in his series, We the People, that in fact we've lived through several different versions of the Constitution, and that each of them was created in a way that was beyond the bounds of the Constitution itself, and therefore created by the people as a kind of constitutional founding. The first one being the writing of the Constitution itself. The folks at the Constitutional Convention were not charged with coming up with a new constitution. They were just supposed to amend the Articles of Confederation. Instead, they said, we got a whole new form of government. The second being after the Civil War, with the passage of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, particularly the 14th Amendment, which were only enacted into the Constitution because the southern states that had rebelled were under military occupation. And
Yeah, I mean, we could talk about that in more detail because
we can.
there's they were under military occupation, but the version of people, if had the people who had voted been allowed to vote, it would have included the majority of people that were slaves and disenfranchised.
Absolutely. Absolutely, and that's part of why those amendments were passed, was to prevent that from being the case.
Right. So it was
My
almost to
point is not
preserve democratic means, or to install them, they had to use military means.
absolutely. That is exactly Ackerman's point. His point is, if you had gone through the normal legal processes and followed everything the way things were set up prior to this moment, you wouldn't have gotten this passed. Therefore, you had to go outside of what you would say is outside the law for the purpose of defending democracy and refounding the Constitution.
Right.
And the third
That's
example
the
he
big
gives is
revolution. That is the American Revolution, really, 13, 14, and 15. It was an unfulfilled promise. Maybe till Brown v. Board, it starts to get actualized. To me, that's really the most misunderstood period in our history, is Reconstruction. And
yeah, it's an absolutely. I think the people who look at it, and there are a lot of people who look at it as a kind of second American Revolution, are not wrong.
mhm.
And Ackerman's third example is the New Deal, which the reigning Supreme Court cases that had dominated from the late 19th century through to the 1920s had prohibited much of what the New Deal set out to do, and it was arguably, and there's obviously a lot of historical debate about this, but there's arguably the threat of court packing that convinced the court to change its mind, specifically about the Commerce Clause, and allow an awful lot more economic regulation than they had ever permitted before. And in fact, the civil rights revolution of the 1960s rests on the back of the New Deal jurisprudence, because it's the Commerce Clause. It is the expansive powers under the Commerce Clause that were used to regulate private discrimination. You could ban legal segregation without touching commerce power, but how do you prohibit hotels from discriminating against Black people? Only by saying you're engaged in interstate commerce, and therefore we are allowed to regulate it, and now we are regulating it. That's actually how the '64 Civil Rights Act works. It's also why Barry Goldwater opposed it, because he was also opposed to the New Deal.
Well, the current moment that we're in, you could view it as assault on Reconstruction amendments, the New Deal, and the civil rights movement. These three big platforms, that the current moment, really, we sit on top of. The whole MAGA, Make America White Again, to me, is really an assault on those three periods of social progress, if you want to call it.
So, yeah, I certainly think there are people in the world of MAGA who look at the world that way. I think there's actually a lot of currents in play there, and what the most recent piece for the Times was about was thinking about what Trump is doing to enhance executive power as potentially a fourth constitutional moment, and what the implications of that would be. And I really wrote it as a more than as a piece written to liberals to say, hey, ring the alarm bells, because I think everyone's alarm bells are ringing already. It was really written more to what I guess I'd call a moderate conservative audience. Was who my imagined audience was, to say, look, you're not wrong that sometimes the Constitution has undergone dramatic shifts and changes, and it hasn't always been through the Supreme Court. This is different in certain ways from previous moments. And the acid test of whether this is a refounding of the Constitution or the destruction of it is, what are you leaving behind in terms of the structure of democracy? And so, if all this is a power grab by one individual to say, I want all the power for myself, I get to decide, what, I get the power of the purse, I'm taking it away from Congress. I get to decide what the Constitution means. I can ban birthright citizenship, even though there's a long history of jurisprudence and legislation taking a different perspective. I get to decide. I am effectively a dictator in the literal sense of the word, that I dictate what the law is, whether I'm elected or not, whether I abide by elections or not. When I'm in power, I am the dictator. If that's what the goal is, then the goal is to get rid of the Constitution, right? That's not a constitutional system. A system where one person has all the power and whatever they say is law is not a constitutional system by definition. So, what is the vision of the Constitution? You people who have, manned the Federalist Society for all of these years and beat the drums for the notion that the Constitution has a fixed meaning that you can only determine by really studying it. Well, okay, what is that vision, right? In the wake of all this, and that's the challenge that I'm sort of putting to them. I don't expect anyone to take it up, but I wrote an earlier piece for the Times, 23, I think, that was about the way in which this movement, right, the effort to centralize all power in the hands of the president as an individual, was potentially going to run afoul of some other currents in conservative jurisprudence that have been very influential in the court. And we're going to see. We're going to see whether the Roberts Court, which has been very friendly to executive power in a lot of ways, whether they're going to be so friendly that they will allow a raft of precedents and established norms to be overridden, or whether they're going to draw a line. And if they draw a line, what happens then? Right? If there are a bunch of 7-2 or 8-1 decisions, or even 6-3 decisions coming down from the Supreme Court saying no, no, no to various things Trump tries to do, and he then defies the court, what happens? We don't know.
Well, I'm Jewish. I got a vague feeling you are. I grew up.
I'm not hiding it.
Yeah, I grew up in a moment where my mother was born in Berlin. I was a baby refugee, and my neighbors were, survivors, their parents from Auschwitz. They had the parties with the numbers on the arms. I remember very distinctly. I grew up seeing a ton of movies, from The Dirty Dozen to The Young Lions, about fascism and Americans beating back Germans and Japanese and tyranny. I read every book, saw all the documentaries from the concentration camps, ruminated on the rise of fascism and putsches, and I feel like it's happening right now, right here. And all I got to stand up against it is this little podcast. I've been having nightmares. I've been having concentration camp nightmares where I've been incarcerated in various Arbeitsmacht-frei installations over the last few weeks. And here we are in this moment. And my generation, and probably yours, basically was trained and lived in in the shadow of those events. I mean, that's our lives. And here it's happening now. I'm asking you, in less legalistic terms, how are you reacting? What do you feel?
So how do I answer that? My father's side of the family. I'll do my own family history first as an answer. My father's side of the family came over, at the end of the 19th, early 20th century. My mother came over after the war. She was born in 1944. And there's a whole story which is too long for this. But
Mama Millman story.
Well, it's the other side, right? She's Weissman, because that's my father's name.
Right. Okay.
But, right. But for most of my life, and for most of her life, what she understood was that her parents were from Warsaw, and that they'd spent the war in hiding, and that she was born in hiding. And it was only when she was almost 50 that she learned that this was not true, that in fact they had made their way east to the Soviet sector at the outbreak of the war, and were deported eastward to a labor camp in not in Siberia but near Siberia on the White Sea, and she was born in the Soviet Union, and then they made their way back after the war. All of my grandmother's family were murdered. Most of my grandfather's family, he has two brothers who survived. They're obviously no longer alive. It was a long time ago. Um, uh, but um, but that's a whole story. But I grew up obviously with a strong consciousness of this history, but I have always been averse to Holocaust Judaism. I've always been somebody.
There's Reform, there's Orthodox, there's Conservative, and there's Holocaust Judaism. It's a new
Yes,
sect.
there is. Yes, there is. It's not a new sect. It is in many ways. I know a lot of people for whom that the trauma of the Holocaust is the center of their Jewish identity, and I always rejected that. I always rejected the idea that that's what Judaism fundamentally was, that that's what the Jewish experience fundamentally was. I always was drawn to the questions of how to live, and not who wants to kill you.
Well, it's sort of this race to victimhood too. It permeates our current moment. We can touch on
yes,
but this Gaza thing is almost between the Israelis and the Palestinians. It's this race for victimhood. Some of that's rooted, I think, in obviously the Holocaust experience, but just
I think that's true. I don't think it is exclusive to that, but I don't like a politics of victimhood for anybody, really. I don't think it's a healthy politics. I don't think it's a healthy way to build an identity. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean that historical injustices aren't important to know about. They are important to know about,
right? Of course.
But I've always been averse to rooting my identity, or to anyone rooting their identity in that. And I still feel that, and I do wonder. A friend of mine said to me recently at synagogue, that she's getting frustrated with a number of people who are engaged in Holocaust cosplay, mm-hmm. who perceive this moment, right, largely in terms of fantasies of their own persecution. And by that, I don't mean that the possibility of truly horrible things happening should be dismissed. It shouldn't be, but I have the same real wariness and the same discomfort with that kind of response. With exactly what you were talking about, of nightmares of being herded into a camp. There are people who right now, right, are being grabbed in the middle of the night and put on planes and buses and whatever, and right. There are people being shipped to Guantanamo. They don't look like you and me. No. They're not in our position. And I think that it's worth keeping an eye on what is actually happening, and what seems likely to happen, or the risks happening, rather than, and that's focusing on the present more than on the past. That's me. That's where I emotionally go. As far as the sort of it couldn't happen here, now it's happening here thing, I also have never really bought into the to either the sort of the nightmare version of American history, or the dream version of American history, the kind of rhetoric that in different ways presidents like Ronald Reagan and Barack Obama engaged in that, talk about America as, this beautiful story of liberty and diversity and these sorts of things. You know, I know, and honestly, they knew that that's only part of the story. And by the same token, the notion that this is a country that is birthed in sin and has been was founded on genocide and slavery and so forth is also not a complete story. And but I think there are beautiful and deeply meaningful and idealistic and humanistic currents that are very powerful in human history, and there are much darker currents that are powerful in human history, in American history, I should say. Um, and it's worth acknowledging both and recognizing that they're both always there. And they're not ever we're not ever going to extirpate the things that we don't like. It's all part of us. It's all part of our inheritance. Um, and I think that the current moment is tapped into some dark stuff, um, and we have to. How do I put this? It's this thing of darkness. We have to acknowledge ours, and yet not thereby become paralyzed and incapable of imagining or building something better than that. Um,
What I would say is, in the Civil War that followed the Dred Scott, and I wouldn't have wanted to been running around in America with the Taney Court, Supreme Court, and the Dred Scott decision, and I couldn't imagine living what a nightmare hellscape would have been in the United States and a black person then. But hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of people marched willingly and thrillingly in the 1860s to their death so that a few could own slaves. And at the same time, hundreds of thousands marched and died so that they wouldn't be slaves. And neither side has really gone away. They're still here. And you can't fully defeat one or the other, although certain sides seem to be in the ascendancy at this moment. That's all I would say. Nothing goes away. These currents are still through our narrative. My thing about Section 14 was the 14th Amendment was Section C, which said if you brought a gun, to a football game, guess what? You couldn't play. If you choose bullets over ballots, guess what? You can't get in the game. And
what's the line from The Big Lebowski? This isn't like Nam. There are rules.
Yeah, and exactly, and they're there, like you said or just inferred.
Yeah.
That particular section isn't that arcane. You don't need a legal degree or been a Harvard professor to understand it. It was written to be understood in its moment. And if it was just they felt for the Civil War, they could have passed the law. But when you put it in a constitution, you're really saying, no, it's for this and for all time. And so there it was. And basically it got run over a year ago like a very shallow speed bump. And here we are.
Well, so I'm going to here's my view on that, because I wrote a piece on that also for the Times, and the piece was called "Only the Voters Can Disqualify Trump," and the people's house is Congress, right? Anyone who's a good popular constitutionalist, right, would say that if the court's going to defer to anyone on what the Constitution means, they should be deferring to Congress, because that's who gets elected by the people. That's that's who is accountable to the people. That's through whom the people speak. Obviously, if the people speak directly, that's also it overrides it on some level. We had a constitutional convention, but in general, if you want to ask sort of what do these words mean, and Congress didn't in any substantial way enforce that section of the 14th Amendment against the Confederates themselves. They did it a little bit, but it was sporadic. It was not comprehensive. And since then, with Trump specifically,
well, there's also
January 6th,
a presidential pardon, Andrew Johnson. So
correct. But in after January 6th, President Trump was impeached and was not convicted. He was acquitted. And I think that was a catastrophe. I think that the arguments that a number of Republicans made at the time, including Mitch McConnell, that, oh, this is something the courts should deal with, were emphatically wrong. I think they were wrong on the merits. I also think they were wrong on the law. And I think it was purely a act of cowardice on their parts. People who absolutely believed he was guilty and did not want him ever to be in politics again, voted to acquit because they thought someone else would deal with it. But what really that meant was acquitting him of precisely that restriction in Section C. He was charged effectively. That's my view. That he was effectively charged with insurrection and acquitted. And to then say, okay, well, what we want is the courts to say, no, that doesn't matter. He's banned from running, I think is giving the courts power that they don't really have. When someone has been chosen by their party to be their nominee, and there's been a process where the people have spoken and said, we don't have a problem with this, for the courts to say, well, we have a problem, I think puts the courts under an unreasonable threat. And I argued strongly that they shouldn't. That their own credibility makes it impossible for them to ban him from running. The Republican Party was who needed to do it.
It's after the fact, so it's moot, obviously.
Yeah.
But I think I would disagree with you because there's certain prohibition. If you're 27 and you got elected or picked, there's very clear provisions in the Constitution that say, no, you got to be 35. You can't do that.
But there's not going to be a evidence. Nobody's going to come forward and say I was declared 35 by Congress. You know what I mean? Like there's not. You know what I mean? Like there's not going to be debate about it.
The
facts won't be disputed.
There are constitutional provisions that don't actually always yield to the popular will, whether it's even the Electoral College but it's just it was there, it was clear, and an acquittal in an impeachment isn't the same stand. It's not like you're not guilty. It's a political expression that there was no how would I say? There was no penalty other than you can't run again. It's not like you would have been incarcerated.
But that's the only penalty under. But that's the only penalty under Section C, also.
Right, but when you
it's the same thing.
But when you say
it's the same penalty,
the impeachment, the fact that they failed to convict on an impeachment, he was impeached. They failed to convict for the second time. Didn't exonerate on the other side. That's all. It didn't mean that all of a sudden that section in 14 didn't matter. That's what I would say.
I think. Well, I don't agree. I think that is as a practical matter. I think
we can still be friends. We can still be friends. No,
I'm glad.
Please, we can still be friends. We have to find a way.
If someone, it is very hard to be friends with somebody who cannot be friends with someone who they disagree with, because we're all always going to disagree about things. I don't think there's anyone on the planet who I agree with on everything. I'd be really alarmed if I met such a person.
Good. Well, I just felt like that was section staring at me. I did a number of podcasts about it, I think with Kermit Roosevelt, the third, who was a Constitution scholar, this guy, Mark Graber, another woman who's really bright about Reconstruction, Manisha Sinha. We all talked about it. We were more like the chorus.
I think that the case that he committed insurrection and should not have been allowed to run is very easy to make. But the question is, who gets to make that case? And
then you have to have a finding of fact.
But the court wasn't going to do that.
Well,
Congress, the fact is that questions at this level are always political. Questions at a constitutional level are always political.
Of course.
And the reason that you have, a court, as opposed to just saying, well, we'll just let Congress decide everything, right, is part of the checks and balances of the American system is designed to slow down action. It is designed to require more in the way of consensus, more in the way of consensus across space and across time for really radical action to take place. That's the whole purpose of the design. If not, you could have had a unicameral legislature and no written constitution and said, whatever you pass, that's the law. And that would be a democracy. And it would have something of a constitution. You'd have to have some kind of electoral system that they wrote. If you look at, the state of Israel doesn't have a written constitution. They have a number of basic laws that they've passed, but they're just passed, by the Knesset. The United Kingdom does not have a constitution. They have a set of norms and precedents, but Parliament could override those if they felt like it.
Mm-hmm.
You can have a system like that. The American system was designed for better or worse, with a lot of veto points, and the purpose of it is to make sure that when the framers designed it, they were thinking, well, what we want to make sure is that no section overrides any other section. We don't want the slave states to dominate the free states. The free states to dominate the slave states. We don't want the East to dominate the West. We don't want. We want everything to be. To have some. There has to be some degree of consensus for things to move forward. In moments of crisis, that can cause a problem. And Ackerman's argument on some level is that that's what the crisis was the crucible in which each of these constitutional transformations happened. I think that Trump himself is a crisis, but has also taken advantage of that sense that he has created of there is a crisis. And he didn't create it out of nothing. I mean, the country wouldn't be susceptible if there weren't a feeling already there to be taken advantage of in certain quarters. But he, not wrongly, looks at the system and says, this system is designed to stop me from doing what I think needs to be done. Let's get rid of that.
Yeah, it's frustrating if you're a dictator.
Yeah.
It's very frustrating. I mean, you have the founders who built this architecture of separation of powers, which is really their genius. And then you have like the Reconstruction Amendments, which all of a sudden they get, wait a minute, this whole liberty idea, we got to kind of try and enshrine that. If we can make that work. Like there's something going on about equality. Maybe we can make that work. Those are 13, 14, and 15. Then you get to the 20th century. You describe yourself as a mugwump. Somewhere I read that. I thought maybe I didn't type it.
That's a little old. Yeah.
My favorite mugwump with Noah Millman.
The mugwumps were former Republicans who switched sides to support Grover Cleveland,
right? Because
they were disgusted at Republican corruption.
Right.
And since I've over the course of my life, I've migrated from, center left to center right, back to center left, and, sort of wandered around a little bit on the spectrum. And I've always been somebody who's very willing to listen to and take seriously people with more radical perspectives than I have. Like I read people who are pretty darn far right. I read people who are pretty darn far left. I've always been much more of a middle of the roady kind of guy, even when I've been more on the left or on the right. But I don't, I don't rule stuff out of bounds in terms of what I'll interact with. But there was a period, I think, in the second Bush term when I decided, what am I? I think I'm a mugwump, because I'm a guy who had been on the center right, and I was like, I'm definitely, supporting the Democrats at this point, and this was part of why. And it stuck.
Let me ask you a question. I got friends that are. In the more Orthodox Jewish community, and they seem like they're in lockstep with the Donald Trump version of the Middle East. They're like one issue sort of people. And you mentioned, I don't know where I read it, was maybe in the Substack, that there's really a trap there for Israel. I'll just lay this out, and then I want you to respond. When I was a kid, there was no greater existential threat to this little socialist country there in the Middle East with the kibbutz, this holy underdog of Israel. There was no more existential threat than the big Egyptian army staring at them across the Suez Canal. They fought wars in 48 and 56, in 67, in 73. And the common refrain, you cannot make a deal with the animals. They are animals. You cannot make a deal with the Egyptians. They are animals. There's no way. You cannot make a deal. They did.
Mm-hmm.
It still holds. In not only Egypt, but to Jordan, it's still held. But I'm old enough to remember when there was no more existential enemy to the Israeli project than the standing armies of Egypt and also the others. And now, we've got this festering issue that's never been resolved since the founding of the state with the Palestinians. Neither peoples are going anywhere. They did it with the Egyptians. They can do it with the Palestinians. When it rains on a Palestinian, it rains on an Israeli. You can't make peace with friends. You've got to make peace with your enemies. Figure it fucking out. And that's my feeling. And I invite you once.
So how long is this conversation supposed to be?
Yeah, tomorrow.
Right. You decided like, okay, we've solved all the problems of American politics.
We haven't.
In the next 15 minutes. In the next 15 minutes, we should be able to solve these.
Well, let's figure out this Middle East and move on to movies, which is more fun. Okay.
I think I don't think I can do justice to my views on this subject in a short time. But what I think is fair to say is that the prospects for any kind of peaceful resolution have never seemed worse to me than they do now. And I think the sincere views of people on both sides have never been further apart than they are right now. That's the sense that I have. I think that, and I understand in both cases why that would be. And so it's easy to say, well, you got to work it out. I don't think there's much prospect for that, and that's a terrifying thought. I was incredibly heartened when the previous government of Israel, for the first time in Israel's history, included a non-Zionist Arab party. So there'd always been, earlier in the state, there were sort of, puppet Arab parties that were controlled by, the Labor Party and so forth, that were included in Israeli government. So there was never one that was an actual popular, rooted in its own community party included in Israeli government. And for the first time, it was. And Abbas, the head of the Ra'am party, I thought and still think is a fascinating figure. The government that he was a part of was an ideologically incoherent collection of parties that were united only by the desire that Netanyahu no longer be prime minister. Naftali Bennett, who was the prime minister under that coalition government, is an extreme right figure, an interesting extreme right figure, but an extreme right figure. Yair Lapid is a liberal centrist. You had more left-wing parties in the coalition as well. You also had this Arab party, which was an Islamist party, a moderate Islamist party, but nonetheless an Islamist party. So you had an incredibly, diverse coalition. But I was incredibly heartened because I've always felt that, and there's one of these things, a Blogging Heads video conversation between myself and Russ Dowdett on this topic. If you look on the internet, you can probably find it, talking about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. And that at the time, and I think this was like 2010 or 2012, the Israeli view was, you know, we got, burned by Oslo, and Palestinian culture has to change, and we have to defeat terrorism. And once we've defeated terrorism, then we can talk peace. Um, and the view from the left was, no, it's the other way around. You have to make peace or you'll never defeat terrorism. If Israel hasn't done enough, then they just have to do more. And I've always believed both, which is to say, I've always believed that you have to pursue both things simultaneously. I think that Hamas, the ideology, is not something that you can have a peace agreement with. They could change their ideology, which is what Egypt did. Egypt changed sides in the Cold War. After 73, they decided, oh, we're not going to win this way, and America looks like they're the better horse to bet on than the Soviet Union, so we're switching sides to America, and that makes possible getting back to Sinai through a peace agreement rather than through war. That I don't rule out anything. Anyone, any organization, and any person, can change. But an organization that declares and acts on the declaration that they want to kill all of you is an organization that has to be destroyed. By the same token, Israel has to reckon with the fact that the land of Israel and the land of Palestine are the same place, that both peoples have a perfectly legitimate claim, that on some level they both have a claim to the entirety of the area, and if they don't want to live together in a single state, then they have to live together in two states that have a reasonably healthy relationship with each other and figure out how to get to that point. That is something Israel has to reckon with. It's something that the Palestinian population has to reckon with. I don't think either people believes that right now. I think right now they both, the level of hate is so high and the level of hurt is so high that both sides, what they really want is for magically the other side to cease to exist. Which is you're right, and that's the trap, I think, of the stuff that Trump has been saying. By saying, well, America's going to take over Gaza and we're going to take all the people out and we're going to rebuild it into something like Dubai, and then everything will be wonderful. It's not going to happen. But the mere fact that he's articulating that fantasy and saying, well, I'm ready to make it happen. Like, if you guys can get your shit together, I'm ready to do it. Right. The people who really want to believe that fantasy now can latch onto that and say, it's not a fantasy. The president of the United States said it. This is totally doable.
Right. It's a magical thinking. Magical
Yes.
thinking is sort of like a disease on probably both sides in certain sectors of both sides. That's why I think, I don't think
the president of the United States engages in it, though, it has an impact on the world.
Absolutely, but he's a big magical thinker. I mean, he's a magical thinker, whether it's Greenland or the Gulf of America, or, he renamed the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America, and the rest of the world renamed the United States as Holistan. So it's so he's a magical thinker. We're not going to resolve this, but I did appreciate Thomas Friedman's book, Jerusalem to Lebanon, or Beirut to Jerusalem.
Beirut to Jerusalem, yeah.
Yeah.
That was a while ago.
But it seems like not much has changed. Some fundamentals are still very much there. And I couldn't help but recall that the greatest of all the Zionists, arguably, Ben-Gurion, realized that you couldn't be, have a democracy and all the land and be an Israeli state. You had to pick 2 out of 3. You couldn't get off. Yeah. That was realistic thinking in the moment. I don't necessarily think that calculus has changed. You said it very clearly a moment ago. And somehow the magical thinking of river to the sea on both sides is magical. Nobody's going anywhere. Israel as a state is one of the miracles of the 20th century. Why did the Israelis get a state and maybe the Palestinians failed? because the Israelis got organized. They lobbied all these foreign governments in the years after World War I. And when the moment came, they were ready to defend it and create it. And the Palestinians weren't, for whatever reason. And there is history in the making and a conflict that's yet to be resolved. So I don't know. That's just, my thinking.
Well, I'm glad we resolved that.
Did we resolve it? Well, let's just get
We resolved it.
Just get real. Get real. That's all.
Yeah.
You or me.
I have a script called that.
Get real.
I have a script called Get Real.
How's it going?
It's big. I mean, I think it's a good script. I wrote it. But I don't know what to do with it. It's a perpetual question of mine, is what do you do with the script? Because so the short version of my how did I wind up writing scripts in the first place was when I finished college, I wanted to be a novelist and started working on a novel and didn't get very far, and then got a day job that turned into a career and wound up working on Wall Street for 16 years.
Ow!
Yeah. Yep.
Ow! Go ahead.
Yeah, and then I quit after the financial crisis. And at that point, most of the ideas I had felt more like movies than like books. And I also knew that screenplays were shorter and more structured. And I thought that would be helpful to be able to learn the structure and just follow it. And so I took the screenwriting sequence at NYU and then started writing, and then started trying to sell a script, not really knowing how to do that. And in the course of that, I still
tell me how. Help me.
And in the course of that, I got connected to this production company in New York called Paper Street Films. And I wound up partnering with them. Mm-hmm. They didn't want to buy my script, but we liked each other, and I liked some of the projects they were looking to do. And so I wound up partnering with them on a bunch of projects, including The Seagull, and learned a lot. They were the lead, producers, and I came on as an executive producer to some combination of helping with the finance, arrange some of the financing, and working on creative stuff as much as I was able to, because that was where I really was passionate about, and learned a lot. And they actually encouraged me to direct. So I had a short film that I wanted to see made, and I said, "Danny, if you want to direct this, or anyone who wants to direct it?" And they're like, "Why don't you direct it?" And I said, "I don't know anything about directing." I said, "Well, director is the only job you don't need to know anything to do," which is not true.
Point the camera at the people who are talking. That's the first thing.
No, because the action is on the person who's not talking.
Okay.
We can hear the person talking. We point at the other person. How do they react to the person talking?
Mike Nichols knew that.
I love that. Yeah, exactly. I was just thinking of the scene in the tennis match in Carnal Knowledge.
Great movie.
Right, where we're on help me name.
You're on Garfunkel.
No,
on Anne Margaret, sitting and watching.
Margaret, thank you.
And Jack's playing tennis with the hot.
Correct. With exactly.
And she's going
right.
Boom, boom, boom. Yeah.
Yep. And you don't see the two players at all. You hear them, and you see Anne Margaret the whole scene, and it just plays out.
I did that in my movie.
It's one of my favorite scenes.
Well, that's one of my favorite movies.
I love
Period. That. My favorite line in the movie is when Garfunkel and Jack are sitting there, and the sensitive one, Garfunkel, says, well, he's talking about his marriage and the difficulty.
Right.
And he goes, Nicholson says something, and he's just banging chicks left and right as they're in their young professionals. And Garfunkel says, looks aren't everything. And Nicholson looks at him and goes, looks are everything. I love that line.
But right. I mean, the film is mocking and satirizing both of them, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it is a brutal, excruciating takedown of the male. It's a tough watch. I've watched it many times. I would watch it again in a heartbeat. It's a tough watch, though.
Jules Pfeiffer.
What was interesting?
Jules Pfeiffer wrote it.
He wrote it. He originally wrote it as a play, and then adapted it into a screenplay. And I read the screenplay, and the screenplay, I didn't know Jules Pfeiffer had written it when I saw the film for the first time. But reading it, I was like, oh my god, I can see the panels. Like it's a strip. Like I can see it.
Oh, okay, the
You know,
cartoon. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
he could have written it as a comic strip, as a series of comic strips, and it would have worked perfectly. It reads like that. Um, and it was a real eye opener to see um, uh, how spare it was. Because I, at that point, when I read it, I was writing. It's interesting. My writing has evolved where the first two scripts I wrote were very visual, and I struggled with dialogue. I tended to know what I wanted to see, but I struggled with with characters actually talking to each other in a way that represented conflict. You know, Mike Nichols's bit about how, you know, every interaction, you know, is either a negotiation or a seduction or a fight. And so, like, which are you doing? How are these two characters trying to get what they want from each other? Is one trying to seduce the other? Is one trying to negotiate with each other to come up with a win-win? Is one trying to overpower the other? Right? Like, how are they trying to get what they want? And I struggled a lot with that. And then bit by bit, it sort of the balance shifted, and now the scripts that I write tend to be very dialogue heavy. And reading Jules Pfeiffer's script was an eye opener because there's so little visual in it. There's almost no description of action, almost no description of anything. You know, he tells you where you are, and then the characters talk to each other, and you can still see it. And I mean, maybe that's because I've already seen the movie. But
Maybe you've seen the movie. Bullshit artist. Bullshit artist. Bullshit artist.
No,
So that's the
no,
movie. That's the line when the two guys are
yeah,
talking, and then
no,
he calls them bullshit artist.
yeah.
I love
Oh, what a great film!
it.
So anyway, it encouraged me to direct. I directed a short. I had an absolute ball doing it, even though it was a mess of a shoot and everything went wrong. And then I wrote another short and I directed that, and then set out to direct my first feature. Couldn't get it off the ground. Then COVID happened. Wrote another feature, or actually wrote another feature, and then COVID happened, and then that became my first feature film that I directed in 23, and which we are now in the process of trying to start our festival run, applying places and waiting to get
What's
in.
it called?
It's called Resentment.
Okay.
And I wrote it. I aimed for it to be a kind of early Mike Nichols picture. Like, I was very much inspired by Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. And oh, you got one of those? The solar opposite. There we go.
Yeah, it's my movie. It's a good movie.
This is my first short. We can play the game.
All right, action. Yeah, my movie, Warner Brothers acquired it. It stars Chris Maloney, and who's pretty well known in New York from Special Victims, or Digging Up Corpses. Timothy Busfield from 30 Something, and beautiful actress Janelle Maloney, who was well known on West Wing. But yeah, I wrote it, directed it. It's all true except for the happy parts, which I added. Here's my little promo. So it's my movie it's been out. It was in theaters. Nice reviews.
Are you happy with it?
Yeah, it's great. It's a great movie. I mean, I have my certain thoughts about it that make me sad when I see it, but I don't watch it much. I don't watch it at all. But
you have watched it since it's been done, right? You've not
on a few occasions, yeah. I mean, it's been.
Yeah.
I've seen it.
What's it like? Like the feeling of watching your own thing once it's all done. Once there's no more, like, it's no longer in process. Like, it's different if you're in the edit. You know, if they're still making changes. Well, what's it like when it's all done for you?
Well, it's like if you're in a play or working on a theater piece. The last piece of information you get about what you did is the audience. And the audience tells you about your movie or your play, or as in my case, as a stand-up comedian, if something's funny.
Right.
You get laughs. And so.
But if you're on stage, you can adapt at that moment to some degree.
But there's.
You can't if you're sitting in the audience watching a movie.
No, but the more you play the more you play the movie, the actors get more and more relaxed, and they start to really inhabit it. The more plays the film gets. No, I'm kidding. it's it can be whatever it is. It's can be massively deflating. A movie could not work. Not things you
Mhm.
hoped were amusing aren't. People fall out of it. You can watch people leave. uh,
Yeah.
there's a whole range. In my case, it was thrilling. It was wonderful. My movie got really
And
good.
still is every time you see it.
What's that?
And still is every time you see it. It
I
still
don't watch it
feels
much.
so.
I encourage people to watch it, but I don't watch it. It's not for me anymore.
Uh,
It's for the public. You could see it tonight. You could download it,
mhm.
the various like YouTube movies for $3.99 or $2.99,
Right.
whatever it is. Um, so it's not for me anymore. Just like when I finish this podcast and I watch it and I do it and it's out there, it's not for me anymore. Uh,
Mhm.
so it's for you, for the world, or for whomever. So yeah, it
I
was
I, I,
thrilling.
re- I revisit stuff. I revisit stuff. It's interesting. Both
Movie
writing
makes me
and
sad. My movie, when I watch it, it's a mixed thing because it's a
uh-huh.
beautiful movie. Some of the things that you and I just talked about in terms of carnal knowledge, the things that you could see those influences, Mike Nichols and The Graduate and things, some movies that were really meaningful to me. And I'm so proud of it aesthetically, but it makes me sad because my movie is inspired out of my own experience.
Mhm.
And it's a younger guy that's no longer there. That's not me.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and so time has passed and I'm different. And so there's some melancholy associated with that. And then there's also what lives with me more than the creative journey of the movie is the war that it took for me to get it exhibited in theaters commercially and
Yeah.
to get through that aperture of the marketplace, which I did.
Mhm.
It was a brutal one. And I had to endure a lot of rejection and at a lot of levels. I'll tell you one story. I was not included in Sundance, which was brutal at the time because that's basically where movies were marketed for, American independent movies. When I say
Right.
independent, I don't mean co-opted by some of the companies at the time, but I mean entrepreneurial. And so I went to Sundance and I showed my film in the basement of hotels. I had video projection at the time. I've somehow managed to score that, and I created my own film festival called Soul Dance because my movie's called Polar Opposite. And I crashed in the press rooms. I remember seeing this woman, the Sundance press rooms, following Michael Moore, the famous documentarian, and I said, "Hey,
Uh-huh.
how are you?" And she goes, "Hi." I go, "Do you know about Soul Dance?" She goes, "No." I go, "Well, it's the most exclusive festival in Park City. Only one movie got in. Do you know about it?" She goes, "No." I go, "It's the solar opposite. You should see it." I go, "What's your name?" And she goes, "I'm Janet Maslin."
That's a good story.
Well,
That's a
so
good beat.
I'm not done.
That's a good scene.
Yes. So, for those that don't know, Janet Maslin at that time was the lead critic of the New York Times. She reviewed the biggest and most important movies that came down the pipe. And I said, "Oh, that's cool." And I said, "Check out my movie. Here's the flyer. It's playing in the basement." You know, well, she didn't come. A couple days later, I crashed again, fake ID, into the press room, and there she is, Mudpad, Sundance. And I said, "Janet." She goes, "What is it?" I go, "If you want to talk to me, just come up to me. But this following me around, it's not working." And she looks at me and smiles. I go, "You want to see the movie? Just come." Well, she goes, "I'm very busy." I said, "Okay, here." I handed her a cassette. So that was that. And I did my little thing. I couldn't get a deal. No
Right.
one, I had people that came in really liked the movie, but later I
Mhm.
got, foreign sales and, DVD stuff. And I got a really
Yeah.
nice review in the trade papers from the from AFI Fest.
Mhm.
Nobody cared then. So a year goes by. I finally get my movie in the theaters because I made a deal with the Lemleys myself. I said, I'll book this fucking movie. Let's make it work. And I had a trailer that was really good and a cut for television and had a little money to spend. And my movie ended up opening in LA, really good reviews in LA Times and everything. I had a limited run. Finally, I got play dates at the Village East in New York. You know where that is, right?
Sure, been there many times.
Ironically, I just do a little story. The Village East used to be the Intermedia.
Yeah, yeah.
Prior to that, the Yiddish Art Theater, Maurice Schwartz. And they made a movie there years ago, a really funny movie called The Night They Raided Minsky's. And I did a play in New York called Goodnight Grandpa with Milton Berle. I played his grandson. It was in the Intermedia Media Theater. And I became very close with Milton Berle, and he encouraged me to do stand-up comedy. So anyway, years later, my movie gets play dates in New York City at the Village East. I didn't realize it, but when I got there, I go, this is the Intermedia Theater. They had subdivided into cinemas.
Right.
And I said to the press person, I said, get my fucking film to goddamn it, to get it to Janet Maslin. She might remember me. And they did. And Janet wrote the review for my movie. And it wasn't a brilliant review, but she said,
but just the fact that it was there for sure is a huge
thing. Said, I forget the words, thank God that this movie justified his mad passion for it, my ability to be out there pushing it. And that was the review that I got. Substance, essentially the basis.
Yeah.
The movie deserved my tenacity, and that was the review. Yeah.
It's a very tough world out there, I don't claim to understand it. I have a couple of friends who made a film, a little indie film, sub 500 type of film, years ago called Bite Me. It was a real life vampire rom-com, a romantic comedy involving one of the characters that thinks of herself as a vampire. She doesn't have any supernatural powers. She just thinks that drinking blood is good for her and health, and she dresses in goth clothes and whatever. And it's a very cute little movie, very sweet. Follows the formula of a romantic comedy pretty solidly, beat by beat, exactly the way it's supposed to. They'd sort of done everything right in terms of how they made it. They made it for the right price point, and they, did a successful crowdfunding campaign to bring in a bunch of money that they didn't have to repay. So they did a lot of stuff right. And then they didn't get a distribution deal that looked remotely like, they got the kinds of insulting deals that indie film generally gets, where somebody slaps their name on it and just sort of dumps it, on, the streaming services with no support, and nobody knows it's there, and they never find it, and nobody ever sees it, and you don't get any money. And more important than the money, you don't get any viewers. And they didn't want to do that. And they said, all right, we're going to self-distribute. And they came up with a plan. They rented an RV, and they hired a documentarian, and they called indie theaters around the country, 35 different cities, and booked 1 or 2 nights, in each theater. And they, would come into town, and they would do screenings and throw a big party on like Saturday night, and like encourage people to come dressed in vampire costumes, and they had merchandise to sell. And then this documentarian along who was like doing a documentary about the process of self-distributing, and like, that was going to be then, they were going to figure out how to distribute that, and get, put it on the internet and get interest in the whole process. So they had this whole thing worked out, and, and they did local advertising in every city where they were. And then they did social media advertising to drive traffic to the film on the streaming services, because it was out there. You could rent it on Amazon, we rented it on iTunes, so it was there. It just wasn't, there wasn't any support for it from the platforms. So, this advertising was there to drive it in conjunction with each of the screenings. So if you couldn't come to the screening, you rent the movie. And they had no trouble booking theaters. Theaters were thrilled to have them. They had no trouble selling tickets. to the like the advertising process worked. They sold tickets, they sold merch, they were able to break even on the whole tour by the ticket sales and merchandise sales. And to a first approximation, nobody rented the film. Like the entire digital marketing campaign to get people to watch it, to rent it, essentially, and they even had good click through rates on those ads. And essentially, nobody paid $3 to watch the film at home. Just nobody. And they sort of came away from that feeling like, oh wow, like so how do you crack that code? It's a tough game that I don't have a remote chance of understanding. Um, uh, but it's you know, but it's the
Well,
game we're all playing on some level.
one of the things I learned when they pulled my movie in New York
Mm,
is that it's really a rare privilege to be in the arena. The arena, by that I mean is theatrical distribution, to be in theaters,
yeah,
be reviewed, with the possibility that you will be ignored and panned and dismissed.
sure.
But that is a rare privilege in our culture. And I had to ultimately, through my tears, even though I had a really good movie, people have, liked it and loved it.
Yeah,
I had to just sort of come to that understanding. To be in the arena is a rare privilege. And
yeah,
not a lot of people write, direct, get a
yeah,
movie made, and actually distribute, exhibit it. I would tell the exhibitors, come, I promise when we show the movie, I'll show up and do Q&J afterwards. I go, what's Q&J? I go, they ask a question, I'll tell a joke.
right.
Made it as entertaining as I could.
Yeah,
Went to extreme. I didn't quite have, when my movie came out, the internet as a marketing, people are still going and reading in newspapers to find movies.
sure.
It was a little bit
And it
before.
was the heyday of the DVD world. Like that was the way that movies recouped was their DVD sales
Yeah,
back then.
yeah. I had two deals. I mean, Warner Brothers eventually. I had one with this other company in Florida, and then Warner Brothers wanted it. I made a deal with Warner
Hmm.
Brothers for domestic cable, theatrical, domestic
Hmm.
cable distribution, and DVD. And I was
Hmm.
really honored. My movie got acquired by Warner Brothers. None of those films at fucking
Yeah.
Sundance got jack, and mine did. And it had special meaning on a deeper level for me because my grandfather Ben Kalmanson was president of Warner Brothers and started there in 1927 and retired in 69 as president of the studio. So I had no connections. Nobody knew by that time, but that has always been very
Yeah.
powerful in my own psyche and my own sense of my own destiny as a prince in disguise in Hollywood. So,
I have no delusions that I'm a prince in disguise. I'm not going to pretend that I don't want, you know, recognition, that I don't want, to, to have done something that people, hail as a classic. Of course I do, right? Um, but I also can't pretend that I am only interested in the work itself. That's the ideal, right? You're supposed to only care about the work. You're supposed to be like, I made the film and I'm proud of it. And that's all that ultimately matters. I'm not, I know what the heart of it is for me. The, did you ever see a movie called Tales from the Script?
you know,
It's a documentary that's basically a bunch of interviews with well-known screenwriters. So they just go through all sorts of different things. What the process is like, and what the life is like, and how your career evolves. So anyway, I there's one interview there with Bruce Joel Rubin, who wrote Ghost, um, and he talks about writing Ghost and the huge success, and riding the high of that. And right after that, he made another film, and I'm blanking on the name of it. I'm sort of tempted to look. Actually, I'm going to look it up just to see what it is, because then this will sound more intelligent. Um, My Life was the film. So not long after Ghost, he made a film called My Life, which he also directed. And I think it was his directorial debut, starring Michael Keaton. And I don't remember the details. I've never seen the film, but the film is something like the guy, Michael Keaton is playing a guy with cancer who's making videos of himself for his unborn child who he's never going to know, or his young child who's never going to remember him, or whatever. And it was a deeply personal project for Ruben, and he really put his heart and soul into it. And it was a total flop. The critics didn't like it. Audiences didn't like it. Didn't make any money. Like, he got it in a very short run because it didn't get any awards. It didn't. Everyone rejected this film, and he was feeling pretty lousy about himself. It didn't matter that he'd had an Academy Award nominated film only like 3 years earlier. Like, obviously, that was a mistake, and the truth is everyone hates me, and nobody likes my work. And then he got a letter. So a mother and daughter went to see his movie, and the mother was battling cancer. And I forget who wrote the letter, if it was the mother or the daughter, but whoever it was wrote it to him, thanking him for making the film, because in the wake of seeing that film, they finally were able to talk about the mother's impending death and just everything that was going to happen and everything they were feeling. They were finally able to open up. And he's being interviewed about this on camera in the film, and he says, that film was a success because I made that film for those two women. That's why I did it, and it was a success. And I was telling this story after seeing the film. That touched me so deeply. And so I was telling the story in my writing group at the time. And I said, that's what it's about for me. Like, that's it. You want to touch people on a deep level. You don't have to touch everybody, but you have to know that you've made some impact on the world. And the guy who ran the group said, yeah, I get it. Do you need to hear from the woman? And I said, yes, I need to hear from the woman. And he said, you may not get that. I was like, I know, but I need to get that. I need, I can't just trust that person's out there. I need to hear from them.
Yeah. Movie making is I don't know. It's a brutal game. I've written 10 screenplays, and when I see my movie, it makes me sad that, I haven't really gotten another chance to direct another film.
Never say never.
What? No, I mean, up till the second. And part of the reason I enjoy doing these podcasts, some of them are docupods, and I have all kinds of other visual material that I edited in on my final editing pro cut thing. In this case, this will be our conversation. It will not be adorned with much other material, but you can do it and you can move on. These screenplays stick with you forever.
Because they haven't become themselves yet. There's still the plan for the thing, and there's no thing.
Right. If you write a novel, I wrote a novel. There it is. Read it. If you write a screenplay, it's a question. It's a request to be a movie, and so it's an unanswered piece. I've often thought that, if the public could be educated in reading scripts, they could have a kind of groundswell life as a something that people could read, because it's just storytelling in the end. It's good story.
I have a friend who's got a publishing imprint that's doing just that. That's just publishes screenplays, like unproduced screenplays, and with the intention of trying to make them into something that people just read. I don't know how successful it is, but just getting off the ground.
I mean, nobody in LA reads anything, so it's they tell you that when you fly in.
They don't watch movies either.
They don't read, but
They don't watch movies either. They look at a clip on their phone and they think, okay, I get the idea.
I known
seriously
that when I made my movie that many people would see it on their phone, it would have blown my mind. I could show you the trailer if I can find it on the video. I won't, but it's amazing because it still lives. You could see it tonight,
right?
And
I won't see it tonight, but I will see it.
Good. Yeah, I mean, it's good. Yeah, the theater. Now, speaking of the theater, you were involved with one of the all-time blockbusters of all time in the theater, which was Anton Chekhov's The Seagull, with Trigorin and Treplev and Masha and the whole crew of it ends with a beautiful suicide in the end. I mean, it's a hit.
Well, that film wasn't a hit. It wasn't a flop, but it wasn't a hit.
That was Annette Bening,
Um,
right? Annette Bening.
Annette Bening, Saoirse Ronan, Corey Stoll, Elizabeth Moss, Brian Dennehy, the
Was he
late great.
Trigorin, the writer, the elderly who seduces the young?
No, no. Trigorin was played by Corey Stoll. Brian Dennehy played what's the brother, the elderly brother of the Annette Bening of. I'm blanking on the Russian names,
Yeah.
but it was yeah. I was on the producing team of that film. I'm not going to say I could not imagine saying a negative word about the film. It was I was only able to be on set a little bit. It was a joy to be there. It was a very happy set. Michael Mayer directed, and he was everybody's friend. Lead producers were Tom Hulse and
He's a good actor. That guy.
he's a wonderful actor. He's also a really lovely guy. Really,
The hell
really
was it? Why wasn't he in the movie? For Christ's sake!
because he's producing now. That's what he does. Tom Hulse and Leslie Erdang were the lead producers, and it was a very happy, friendly set. It was a real. Yeah, I was only there on set for a few days, and it was a joy to be there. I was pretty far from the production, let's be perfectly honest. But as soon as I heard about it, I was incredibly excited to jump on the bandwagon. And you know, at the end of the day, I think The Seagull is a play, and it's something that I'm sensitive to because the script that I wrote for Resentment reads very much like a play. And multiple people who read it said, why aren't you doing this as a play? Why are you doing it as a movie? And part of the honest answer is because I want to direct a movie. Like I wrote it so that I can direct a movie. I want to direct a movie. But another part of it was that there were specific moments, not every single moment in the film, but specific moments that I saw through the eye of the camera that I thought, that's the way I want to do it. That's how to land this. I don't think it'll work that way on stage. I would have to do something different because this won't land. And those were most of the crucial, most emotional moments. And so I thought I'm thinking of it as a movie, even though it is very play-like. It's 3 acts that are equal in size. It's almost all in one location. It's extremely dialogue driven. It's a play. But to me, it was a movie. But I think finding out, I think it is a challenge. It's an interesting challenge how to make something that feels like a play into a movie. One of my favorite, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf is a sterling example of succeeding at doing that. That's a magnificent movie, and it absolutely was a play. There's a tiny indie from the 90s called What Happened Was. It was Tom Noonan's first film. And I believe it originally was a play. But it's basically 2 characters in an apartment on a date playing out in real time. And it's incredibly cinematic. And it's cinematic without cheating. The camera doesn't draw attention to itself. It doesn't say, like, I need to let you know that this is a movie, so we're going to swoop around and do all sorts. It was like you're in it. And everything the camera does is done for a reason. 12 Angry Men is another play that was a great movie.
Jack Warden, I got to get to the ball game.
But it feels like a movie.
Doing the anger.
Yeah.
Man, Henry Fonda.
But it feels like a movie. And it feels like a movie again. The camera is used very intelligently. Sidney Lumet talked about how Sidney
Lumet directed it, I believe, offhand.
Yeah. That's what I said. Sidney Lumet said that part of the language of the movie is that the angle the camera's at drops steadily over the course of the film. So that when we start out, we're above eye level. We're up here looking down on everybody. And bit by bit, we would get down to eye level, and now we're even. And then bit by bit, we get lower, and we're looking up at everybody. And the angles start getting expressionist, and the ceiling starts appearing, and it looks like it's pressing down on them. And the claustrophobia gets greater. it's marvelous, and when you know about it, you watch the film, you can see it, but you don't see it if you don't know about it. You just feel it, and that's what the way you're supposed to use a camera, right? It's not supposed to draw attention to itself. It's supposed to evoke something emotionally in you by being used that way. And I tried to steal that for Resentment for Act One. I was like, I want to do the same thing. We're gonna start here. We're gonna go here. It didn't quite work out, but for a variety of reasons. But
Well, Sidney
but
had great respect for actors. He was out of the group theater. He was a
yes,
child actor in the Yiddish theater. So he came out of a tradition that made me come to New York, Stella Adler
yeah,
and all that. And so he had great respect for actors and performance.
yeah,
And you can see it from that movie to Dog Day Afternoon and Serpico. I mean, there's the whole
sure.
slew. Nobody did New York better than Sidney Lumet, for Christ's
He
sakes.
was a great one of the great directors of all time. I love his stuff.
And he didn't have pretensions that he was also a writer and an artist. In other words, he was a
You don't
director.
think he thought of himself as an artist?
No, I mean, I cut that as a writer. In other words,
Yeah,
he didn't.
yeah,
He believed in the division of labor
yes,
in movie making. That's a problem today, I believe, in our cinema.
absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's well, because how do I put this? I have so many friends who are screenwriters who don't see any path forward to getting their work made and are basically like, okay, so I guess I have to do it all, myself. Um, and then you have the studios, the 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 executives, whoever they are, think that they are think that they should be writing it on some level. Like in the old days, right? You had people in charge who had an appreciation for good storytelling, right? And so they would enforce a kind of discipline. You have to write it this way. You have to, this is going to get greenlit because they knew what they were looking for. And yes, they could intervene, to change endings and things like that. Um, but they had some story sense. My sense now is that there's not much of that. And instead, if it's a commercial property, the considerations that are brought to bear have nothing to do with story. Have to do with the expectation that this thing isn't even going to be received as a story. It's going to be received as clips. It's going to be received as ads. It's going to be received as marketing tie-ins. It's like it's just that, right? And we just want to make we just want to make all of that work, and the story is secondary. And meanwhile, I think they're not enforcing that kind of discipline on like a lot of film that has more of a like an art like cachet to it, and as a consequence there's a lot of just bad storytelling out there.
A lot of
um,
pretentiousness. We could name the movie.
yeah,
One of the great skills in movie making that really is undervalued and not understood or appreciated today is producing. And I don't mean
mm,
the guys that can get the money. Uh, I mean the
no,
guy.
that's important.
It is, but this is another talent of it.
Yeah,
Is the guys or women that could understood good
yeah,
story, and that talent is largely been abdicated. The studios, in and of themselves, in my view, have abdicated their core kind of function. So, like,
yeah,
I should have a studio deal. Let's make these movies, and then but the studios defer all these decisions to the agencies and to the attachments and to all this other stuff, and their core power was they had the credit lines, which meant they had the money, and they could say we're going to make this and this and this, and now they wait to see that you cobble everything together, and maybe, but you can't unless you have the green light. So it's almost a Sisyphean kind of friggin' world that at least I found myself in.
yeah.
I mean,
But I
listen.
don't think people really know what movies are for at this point. I mean, they don't have the place in the culture that they used to have,
You're right.
and that's technologically driven. I mean, honestly, and so we know that there's a huge amount of demand because people subscribe to Mubi and people subscribe to the Criterion Channel and people like, when they do revival screenings at art house cinemas, they sell out. Like, it's not like there's no demand for going to the theater, and it's not like there's no demand for seeing, great movies. It's still there, it's still robust. Um, but I guess it isn't robust enough to support the whole ecosystem of movie making. And so that has been retooled around other values. And when I said like they don't think the movie's going to be even received as a movie, I think that's true. Like I think we talked about sort of where are people going to watch it. It's not just that they're going to watch it on this tiny phone. They're going to watch the whole thing. They're going to watch clips of it over and over. The memeable bit. Over and
Yeah.
over, and everybody knows that, right? And so if that's the unit that matters, if that's what's actually going to be what the audience is actually going to mostly get, then it's only rational to not put that much emphasis on like the whole art form. But it's doing incredible damage to the art form. The fact that that's the case, and I it all makes me very, very sad. And I get happy whenever I see a good movie. And I still see them all the time. Um, but there's
I live in Turner
fewer of
Classic.
them.
I live in Turner Classic.
Sure. Right. The fact
I-
that Turner Classics is a thing is proof of the level of
and I'm
demand.
surrounded by all my other extinct creatures. My DNA is
Oh,
over. I get it.
yeah.
I'm bound for extinction. I'm a Jurassic era, Triassic, Cretaceous kind of creature, roaming the wood of the holly. Uh,
Yeah. I mean, I don't believe that art forms go away in that way. Like it's always there to be revived. And I just don't know what economic and technological circumstances will make it possible,
well,
for it to really
I'll,
revive in that
I'll
way.
say this, and I agree with it. What you said, I don't know, a few moments ago. There is demand. Not only is there demand for the theatrical movie experience, there is a pent up demand for the theatrical movie experience.
Hmm.
Good stories, well told. I believe the people will come. Movies are still a great deal. The night out, even though they're overpriced with parking and popcorn and all the other crap, but it's still a great deal. And people it's a date, and it's still a good story, well told. There is demand for it. I think the system of selectivity and how they have get made has coarsened the public. I think the delivery system, okay, you can stream it and enjoy a movie, but there is still something fun and worthwhile about going to the theater. I mean, my favorite cinemas, the ArcLight, have been closed, I don't know, since 3 or 4 years now. I've done
Yeah.
jazz shows in front of the boarded up Cinerama Dome just to kind of
Uh,
point that out. But I still have hope. Good stories, well told. There's room for them. I don't know. I need to just to be happy. You got to keep. But I have
you
not
do.
written new screenplays. I have not felt the. I did a lot of research.
Yeah.
Something that I didn't write. Maybe I will, because I don't have the kind of hopefulness that there's a place for movies, and it's hard to get people to read. I mean, I've got for myself. I did direct one movie that I wrote, but I've written 9 others. There's 4 or 5 of them
Right.
that would be really good, even to this day. But
Yeah.
gee whiz, I
Well,
don't.
look, I haven't given up. I mean, I'm still hoping that Resentment gets some kind of recognition, and on the back of that, then I'm able to make the next one. I have the next one ready to go. The script
So
is
Resentment
done and is ready.
filmed. It's filmed.
It is filmed, cut. It's all done. The edit's long since complete, and all the post production is complete. We've submitted to 40 some odd festivals. We got rejected by Sundance. We got rejected by South by. We're waiting, to see where we do get in, where we can premiere, and where and what kind of reception it gets at the festival that it does. The great thing about film festivals is you will definitely have an audience and you get to meet them. If you go, you're there, and all of the people who are there because of the movies, right? They were all cinephiles of one sort or another, or what are they doing at a film festival? So it's the best possible audience, and I'm really looking forward to that. That to me is an enormous privilege, to be able to share, something that meant so much to me with other people who don't know who I am, and then get to know them get to know me through the work, and me get to know them through their reaction is an enormous privilege. I'm really looking forward to it. I can't wait to find out where we start.
Get that fucker in projectors, man. Get it out.
Yeah.
Get it in projectors. Get the light.
Yeah.
Get it out there. That's
But I haven't given up. I've got two other scripts that are one that is ready to go, and the other one which is a similar size. It needs more work on it, but like both of them are like indie projects. Like they're not. This was like a $500,000. That was like a $500,000 film. These are bigger than that, but they're still like sub 3 million type films. So the sorts of things you can put together outside of studio context. But you need a real production company behind you. You need
the power of power of American corporations also to create awareness. I mean, it's hard to create it on.
Yes, it's impossible for me. I don't know how to do it. I think you need to be the sort of person who that is their talent, right? Who have that kind of talent for self promotion and have already turned themselves into a star. And people do that. I mean, that it's more possible to do that on your own now than ever before if you have both that kind of work ethic, that kind of talent, and that kind of extraordinary luck. All three. But there are people who've done it. There are the Bo Burnhams and the Lady Gagas and the people who created themselves. I'm not that person.
Well, I mean, creating themselves
on that scale.
If for the artist or the singer or somebody, yes, but creating the groundswell around a piece of movie is I mean, it may be similar, it might be different, I don't know, but
I think the only people who could do that themselves are the people who've done it for themselves, right? Who've turned themselves into stars in that way. I think those people can get a project going just on their own strength. But anyway, I haven't given up. I haven't given up, and then I have some other scripts that I've written that are bigger, and those I don't know what to do with. I'm writing one now. I'm in the middle of the first draft of a science fiction thriller, which I'm writing mostly to see if I can do it. I've never written anything like that, and I want to find out if I can. Because it's me, of course, I'm wandering off into political and social topics that I probably didn't need to, but they mattered to me. But I think it's we'll see what it's like when it's done. But then I'm not sure what you do with it. Because
you beg people to read it. That's all you can do. You write something and you ask and beg, and you hit 4 words. Would you be willing? Would you be willing to read my script? Would you be willing?
Yeah.
Would you be willing? Can I send you? Would you read this? You got to get people to read. Pitching is bullshit. Get people. The pitch is to ask so people can read, because the selling document is the screenplay. I wrote it from beginning to end. So if you're going to pitch it, it's about my pitch with my story. The solar opposite is about a comedian whose love life is a joke. About a comedian whose love life is a joke. Okay, so would you read it? It's all true except for the happy parts. These were more like after the film was made, when it was to see. But basically, get people to read it. That's all. Everything you do is, get people to read it and pray that it can find its way through the system. I noticed you mentioned in your bio you do financing, so you have some.
Well, I had some experience with that. That's kind of over. I mean, I raised the money for my film because nobody else would do it, but that was a very small scale endeavor. But yeah, for the Seagull, for Infinitely Polar Bear, for a couple other projects, I was raising money mostly from my old Wall Street colleagues, and but there was a project that I was involved with that crashed and burned, and basically ended that effort. To make a long story short about it, it was a film that had a big name star, and the entire budget was built around the star. I thought it was a really good script, and I thought the whole ensemble cast was great, and that star was also kind of perfectly chosen. He was a comedian, but this was a sort of dramedy or dark comedy or something, but like mostly a drama. And I thought it played really well off of his comic persona, so it was a really good casting choice. And he walked 2 weeks into pre-production, so we were already spending money, and he walked off the project. And he was a big name, and we were a small group, and we were not in a position to force him to do anything. And we tried. I wasn't really doing this, but the lead producers tried to get somebody to parachute in and become, and save the film by becoming the lead at the last minute, and it was not ever very likely, and so they had to shut down the whole project. And it's one thing to raise money for something and have people lose money, and the film's not very good or whatever. Like it just didn't work. It's another thing to not even have the film and to say, okay, we're giving the rest of your money back, but you lost 20% and there's nothing to show for it. And I don't think I'll ever be able to raise money from those people again. But more broadly, like, I don't feel comfortable putting myself in that situation again of saying, like, yeah, I believe in this project. I believe in these producers. Oh,
Well,
like,
investing in movie, you shouldn't say investing. If you want to invest, go to Microsoft or go to Apple and invest. Buy
Right.
stocks. That's an investment. There's nothing in the movies, especially that's outside of the companies, that's truly an investment. It's not a good word. Would you like to place $100,000 on one square on a roulette wheel? That's basically the gamble.
Yeah, but I think that the people who really do this and don't mind taking the losses are doing it for some combination of believing in the art form, believing in the people involved, believing in the project specifically, and the sense of glamour and excitement of being part of the process, and all of that soft stuff. I got to hobnob with so and so, whatever. And if the film winds up like in this situation, right, where the film didn't get made and they still lost money, none of those things happen.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like,
you get a premiere, you get a party.
Right, exactly. You make the movie, you go to the premiere, blah, 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 and then it loses money. You go like, yeah, well, okay, I knew that was a lottery ticket. I knew that the odds were I was going to lose money. And even when I say that, there is a difference between, for all the films that I was, with one exception, for all the films that I was raising money for before my own feature, they all had bankable casts. And so they were all pre-sellable. And so you could say, okay, look, there's risk, but, we've already sold, France, the Netherlands, and Italy, and we hit the sales targets for those. So you can see that there's proof of concept, or we've already got, so-and-so in the cast, and they're huge in Latin America. And so we've got estimates like through the roof for what the sale's going to be like there. And so now you say, okay, I'm putting $100,000 into this. The odds are I'm going to lose money, but I'm not going to lose $100,000. Because like they've got proof that this is going to go somewhere. They're going to make the film. The film's going to be okay. It's still going to star, this Zoe Saldana or something. And so it's going to get out there. And my worst case scenario is, I get this much comes from the tax credit and this much comes from foreign sales, and there's some kind of domestic distribution, and I'm going to get 70% of my money back, if the film's a turkey, and I'll get 100% of my money back if the film is good. And then there's this tiny chance that like the film is great and like all the stars align. I think most investors in that level of film, that's the way they go in, is they want to see the business case, and then they know it's a risky case, and it's a risky case with an expected value of losing money, but not losing that much.
And they're not going to lose so
And
much that it hurts them, like in a casino. Like you go to a casino,
well,
I've got 100,000, 10,000 I can pay, I can lose and still have a good time. Basically,
right.
those are the people, in situations you're trying to get. I'll tell you,
But
this guy, Sandy Howard. Sandy Howard,
mm,
one of the great indie producers from Westchester County. He was a friend of my family's. He famously made a big hit called A Man Called Horse, and then a sequel
oh yeah.
with Return of a Man Called Horse. And I used to see him at the film market. Sandy Howard, he's God rest his
Mm.
soul. And he loved me. He knew my family, but he liked me. I think he knew my grandfather. And he knew I had some writing and acting talent. He would call me up. He'd go, Billy. He goes, it's Sandy Howard. How are you? Good. We've just secured the North Yemen video rights. The courier is in Ankara tomorrow. Be ready to work on Monday. Click. Phone hangs up. He was well past his prime at that moment. He was actually in the throes of a kind of dementia.
Oh dear.
But I used to get these calls like repeatedly, and
That's hilarious.
Yes, the South Yemen, we have secured the South Yemen video rights, the courier, and it will be ready to work on Monday. Click. Okay, I'm ready, Sandy. Of course, Monday came along and no phone call.
Nothing happened, right? Yeah.
He had his moment in the sun, I mean, listen, I love movies. I lived them and grew up in them and fantasized about being in them. I'm in a movie. I've been in a number of movies. I'm in a movie that was won Best Picture called Argo. I'm in that movie. I'm in a movie. The last picture I did was with the woman who starred with Mike Nichols, Rita Moreno, and she was in college.
Yeah.
With Jane Fonda and Sally Field and Lily Tomlin. I'm in a movie called 80 for Brady.
Okay.
So, I've had some stuff.
It ain't over. It ain't over.
No.
It ain't over till you're 6 feet under.
I know, and even then,
As long as you're above ground, you're still no. Once you're under, you're under.
Yeah,
That's actually the end.
Well, Noah Millman, you're now my newest friend on earth, and we've made it for public consumption. I want to just give people a chance. Check out the Substack, Gideon's Substack. That's your platform, your blog, or whatever it is. I didn't quite know what a Substack was until I started reading about it after you and I spoke a couple days ago. Check out Gideon's Substack. And I think, you're a thoughtful guy. You're a polymath covering all kinds of subjects. We didn't even get to Shakespeare, which apparently...
We're going to have to do it again.
Yes. I don't know if you checked out, I have a series on my own YouTube channel called Shakespeare in the Shower, where I've done about 10, where I just felt like, there's some great movies in Shakespeare,
Sure.
I think Olivier's Henry V is one of the greatest movies ever made, period.
I have a script. I did a film adaptation of Timon of Athens, which I think is Shakespeare's most obscure play.
Yeah,
and it's topical. It's timely because it's set in Moscow in 1999, and I'm using the script to tell a story about the death of Russian liberalism. So it's a really good script of Shakespeare's most obscure play, and no one will ever make it.
Well,
I wish they would.
Who knows? I mean, great Shakespeare movies. I'm going to name a few that I love. Henry V.
Yep.
To me, that's just like magical. Or
do you like the Ian McKellen Richard III?
I like that movie. My Kingdom.
I do too.
But I don't recall it that recently.
Chimes at Midnight.
Chimes at Midnight. Orson Welles, Henry IV, Henry V, and I think a little of
it's Henry IV parts 1 and 2. I don't think he uses any of Henry V. Yeah,
and a little of Richard II, kind of. Just
I think there might be a tiny bit. Yeah.
Yeah. Richard II, I think, would be a really good. Under the right hands, it could be a really good movie.
It's a tough one. It would make a better movie in some ways than a play because it's on stage. It's quite static.
Well, there's battles and there's wars and all kinds of. It's a coup essentially.
It is a coup. There isn't really a battle, though. The battles in Ireland are off stage.
But,
But
but it's a movie. We filmed the friggin'
it's a
battle.
movie. You could. I would go if I were doing Richard II. I would go in a different direction than that. I would go in a more of a sort of fever dream, like really close to Richard's own consciousness, hallucinatory kind of take on it.
How I may compare this prison where I live unto the world, and for the world is populous.
Yes.
And here I am. That's one of my Shakespeare in the Showers. That great.
It's a great speech.
I worked on that really hard. I nailed it. I think I was pretty proud of myself.
Good. That Private Idaho.
I don't know. What about
that? It's a great movie. It's a great Shakespeare movie.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah. There's chunks of Henry IV in it. It is among other things a take on Henry IV, or a take on Henry IV in which Poins is the main character. There's big chunks of Shakespeare's dialogue in it, and it goes in and out. There's big chunks that have nothing to do with Shakespeare.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Gus Van Sant, a great film, great, one of my favorites.
Polanski's Macbeth.
Macbeth. Yep.
Orson Welles' Othello. It's fantastic. I'll tell you a story about that. Well, first of all, my first episodes of podcasts, I did Hamlet and Othello. I played all the parts.
Mm-hmm.
Each act was an episode. I just, fuck it, I'm going to do it. I'm going to get all the parts I can't be cast in because I want these parts. And I was in Essaouira surfing. I love to surf, which is in Morocco. And it's an ancient Portuguese port with all the battlements. And I'm walking around and there's Orson Welles Park. Oh, they shot Othello here because it was the stand-in for Cyprus.
Got it.
Port, and he gets a lot of criticism for it because he's white, but I think Olivier's Othello is fantastic.
Sure.
And here's another movie I think is fantastic. It's hard to get. Peter Brook's King Lear.
I haven't seen it. I've heard of it. Yeah, I've never seen it.
You've got to get it if you're into Shakespeare. I'll tell you why, and we'll just use this as the exit. King Lear, my last Shakespeare in the Shower is Edmund,
Yes, I saw that one.
Oh, okay, good. I hope you liked it. Thanks.
I did.
Oh, good. Anyway, there's not a nation state where a king would divide his kingdom up, and give it to his kids or his daughters. That's a period of time that's actually before the nation state idea happens. It's in deep time. It's like way before the nation state idea is it's just my fucking kingdom, my property. We're going to divide it up here and I'm going to go party. Okay, that's this king. Lear. And what Brooks does is he really creates a time and a place that these guys are in bear robes and it's really primordial in a way.
It's caveman Lear,
Beowulfian, because but it's logical because the nation, like Hamlet, there is an idea of a nation state, and there's Poland, and there's there's Elsinore, and there's France, and these ideas. So the kings, Claudius would never divide up the kingdom. That would be unimaginable. But in Lear, it happens. And the thing about what Brooks does is it's believable. It's believable. And man's way closer to nature in a way that he would be, a few hundred years later. These boundaries are and he creates that time and the place that to me gives. So when Lear is, blow wind, cracky fires, he's really in nature. He's fucking naked, and it's believable in the context. It's not like he's taking off collars and robes and all this. No, it's a bear rug, and there you are. So that's a great movie. I recommend it. Anyway, we could go on forever. I'm interested in
we could.
Israel and the Bible and Shakespeare. I know you're working on something there. You were a big-time braniac. You're living in the tradition all the great Jewish thinkers, Maimonides,
Oh,
Spinoza,
jeez.
Martin Buber, and now Noah
Come on.
Millman. Here we are, ladies and gentlemen, in the current moment, breaking it down with yours truly. Check out Gideon's Substack, right? It's
I
worth.
hope they do.
I've been getting the missives and reading the articles, and I appreciate it. And you, thanks for
I
hanging.
appreciate you having me on. This has been a delight.
Okay, and stick around when I say goodbye. So you're here to say goodbye. To all you folks out there, like I say, check out the Substack. Look out for Noah's movie. It's coming down the pike. It's called
Resentment.
Resentment. Hold on to your resentment. It's coming soon. Till next time. Namaste, shalom, and aloha. By that I mean, namashaloha. See you.